everyone, and welcome to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, hi, I'm Natalie, and if you're not new here, welcome back. We're gonna be doing something a little bit different this video and diving into a supernatural story while I do my makeup. As always, the makeup products that I use in this video will be linked in the description below, so if you have any questions about what I used, click down there. Also, please ignore this nail. I just broke it this morning and I have yet to find the tip of it. It could be anywhere, but let's get started. For today's spooky tale, we're going to be taking it back to the year 1981, where for the first time in US history, demonic possession would be used as a defense in the court of law. Spooky. Today we will be talking about Arne Johnson and the infamous case of the devil in Connecticut. You've probably seen some stuff about this online or even on Netflix, which recently came out, I think like this past year. But I remember back in the day, I watched this episode from a show that my mom actually introduced me to, which is probably the reason why I'm freaking obsessed with spooky things now. But I don't know if you guys know the show A Haunting. Incredible. Truly a show that I would watch so much when I was like 10 or 11. So it was really interesting being able to go back into it and watch that show again, and there was just something about that show that I missed. But there are obviously a lot of things that the docuseries and the show did not include that were in the court cases, so we're going to be diving into that today. I'm excited. Now, the defendant in this case was Arne Johnson. Now, Arne had a pretty normal-ish upbringing. He actually grew up in Connecticut with his single mom and his two sisters. People spoke very highly of him, and he was never really in a lot of trouble growing up. Arne even apparently dropped out of school to help his mom with the bills, which was very kind of him. So money was obviously a little bit tight for them, but they made it work. Now, it was around this time that Arne met his future wife, Debbie. They met each other at a supermarket, and I'm gonna be honest, when I was researching this, a little weird. So Arne was 12 years old and Debbie was 19 at the time when he went up to her at the supermarket, but apparently they said that it was love at first sight. A little odd, definitely a bit of an age gap there. Now, Debbie said that at first she tried to really discourage Arne coming on to him and stuff, but eventually she was just like, all right, whatever. I really like this guy. Again, a little gross, but okay. I guess this happened for quite a few years, and then when Arne was about 16 years old, Debbie and him finally fell in love from her perspective. I'm putting too much. I'm realizing the more that I do this, I am not good at multitasking, so bear with me here. Let's try and save this eyeshadow. So I guess Arne was actually trying to like come on to Debbie for a while, but it wasn't until they were 16 that Debbie said that they finally like fell in love. That blue, very pretty. They even had sort of like a little makeshift marriage situation happening when Arne's mom stopped working and couldn't work anymore due to her illnesses. Debbie did end up moving in with Arne's family after getting married, but apparently they didn't really like the city of Brookfield that they were living in that much, so they decided to move from there away from his family, not too far, but definitely not like in the city part of Connecticut. They were saying that the reason for their move was because the area that they lived in wasn't really nice. She was quoted saying that there was a lot of street fights happening at the time, so they just kind of wanted to get away, nothing crazy. While they were searching for a new place to live, they found what they considered and described as their dream home. This was in a smaller town near Brookfield called Newton, and this was like sort of in the backwoods area of the town, so they were still going to be closer to home but have a little bit more privacy and be away from the violence that they were trying to get away from. Now, at this time, Debbie was a dog groomer at the local animal shelter, and Arne worked for a tree service company. So this move in general was a pretty big deal for them financially, but they were really looking forward to it. Debbie was even quoted as saying, quote, "It was my dream house, and I thought we could build a nice life there." Clearly unaware of all the shit that was gonna go down. So her younger brothers, Alan, Carl, and David were there to help them move. Now, David was only 11 at the time, and I remember this scene in A Haunting very vividly. Now, just a side note, this family has kind of changed their story a little bit. The Haunting episode, a little different. In the Haunting episode, David was the only one helping them move in, but they said in the Netflix documentary that it was the three brothers there. So if there's ever anything that clashes, I'll go ahead and note it to you guys, but you'll notice as the story goes on, there's kind of a few things that have changed throughout the years from their perspective. I don't know, maybe they remember it differently, but I feel like this is something that I would quite literally never forget, so take that with a grain of salt. Now, apparently David, her youngest brother, was only 11 years old at the time, and she described him as like a really nice kid. She said he always had a smile on his face and was just like really nice. What 11-year-old would help you move with a smile on his face? Literally none. Now, apparently while they were moving in, they went upstairs to the bedroom and discovered that the previous tenants had left a ton of their stuff. A lot of furniture, including like a dresser, a waterbed, which big at the time, I guess, in the 80s. David was upstairs in the bedroom and he was kind of playing on the waterbed. So Debbie said that she left David up in the room and they started to get ready with moving and everything. So David was in the master bedroom by himself. It was at this time that David said, quote, "I was in the bedroom on my own, but I could feel something. I was pushed backwards onto the bed." Ew. No thank you. Then he said that in the corner of the room, he saw a man that looked like he had been burnt. I'm really thinking like American Horror Story right now, but it looks like he had been burned alive. And he said, "Beware." Which, if that ever happens to me, I am immediately leaving. I'm not going back into that place ever again. I don't mess with that kind of stuff. If you're ever in a situation where a ghost is telling you go, go. Like, why would you fight that? Truly, I don't understand. So apparently David did just that. He hauled ass out of that freaking room and then he went outside, and they said that he literally refused to go back into the house for the entire day, which good for you, David. Set your boundaries. Do not go in there. You don't have to. I am like very superstitious with this kind of stuff. If something is not feeling right, I am leaving and you can't stop me. Now, I guess David did not tell them what happened at the time, so they just continued moving throughout the day, and he just literally just stayed outside, which, can you blame him? So later they went back to Debbie's mom's house to drop David off, and that's when he finally came clean and told them what happened to him in the bedroom and what he experienced. Of course, like most adults, they kind of just dismissed it and said that he just had an overactive imagination and that he was just imagining that. And then it must have just been like a daydream or a dream that trickled into reality. Maybe you took a nap and something happened. But if I ever see a kid hauling ass outside of a house that I'm moving into, I'm immediately moving my shit out. Absolutely not. I'm not messing with that. So David kind of dropped the situation, but David started having interactions with that burnt man. So whatever ghost David saw in his older sister's house followed him to his house in Brookfield. He called this man the Beast. So David's experiences with this entity truly started to heighten. He said that his family started to see scratches on him, and he just started to have these interactions where he was being pushed and shoved by this imaginary thing. Arne was quoted as saying, quote, "The scariest part was seeing David go through this with nothing there to do it." Now, the family ended up going to the church for help, and an unnamed priest recommended that they start to pray. Obviously. I feel like that's the most basic advice that you can get, but pray they did. And apparently nothing was really happening. The activity with David just continued to heighten and get worse. So it was at this time that they reached out to self-appointed demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren. You probably have seen a scary movie from them or two. They're pretty popular. Now, after reaching out, Ed and Lorraine Warren did visit Arne and Debbie's home. This visit was a little controversial amongst the family, and specifically Debbie's brothers. Now, Carl, one of Debbie's brothers, was quoted in the Netflix documentary The Devil on Trial as saying, quote, "I was 15 when my brother was supposedly possessed. I just wanted the truth to come out because an innocent man got killed, and they wanted to play it off like the devil made me do it. It's far from the truth. I know because I lived it." End quote. Now, if you have seen that Netflix documentary, you'll know that Carl and the father are basically the only two that didn't believe that any of this stuff happened, including the possession. Carl also said, quote, "It turned into a show. Instead of focusing on helping David, let's record him." Which is something that I find really interesting because it seems like, I don't know, it kind of seems pretty accurate to the movies. I'm not sure if Ed and Lorraine Warren are truly helpful in situations like this, as they are kind of like protagonists, but let's keep going. Something that was really interesting that Carl did mention was that during one of David's cursing fits, when he was cursing at his mother, supposedly possessed, he came in, grabbed him, slapped him, and told him enough is enough. And Carl said, quote, "And sure enough, the devil sat down and was very quiet." So I'm glad at least he listens to my father, which is a really funny quote, and I think very telling of what was going on in the house. I know that in some situations, the older brother Carl was also mentioning saying that whenever Ed and Lorraine would mention anything that would typically happen to a person who was supposedly being possessed, the next day or the day after, David would start to kind of mimic whatever Ed and Lorraine Warren were saying at the time. So just take this story with a grain of salt. Now, unlike movies like to make us think, any exorcism takes a very long time to get approved by the church. It's just their normal protocol. A lot of the times it's more of like a mental health problem or a mental health concern that they're trying to address. But apparently Ed and Lorraine Warren said that they can do a minor exorcism for David so that the family wouldn't have to wait as long, which don't do that. Anybody. That's not a good idea. Now, it was during this time that they took him to the church. They had the priest perform the exorcism, or the little mini one, and they said that a lot of really strange things started to happen to David. During the exorcism, he was becoming so strong for an 11-year-old that multiple people had to hold him down physically. According to Arne, his body started to contort in some really weird and unnatural ways. And they even said that when they put a cross on his head that it began to sizzle, which I need a little bit of clarification. Like, what is a sizzle? Like just a sizzling sound? Was the skin actually sizzling? Like, I need a little bit more clarification on that. Apparently, David even began choking at one point and everybody really started to panic. It was while this was all happening that Arne told David, "Leave this kid alone. I'm here. Take me on." Dummy. He said that once he said it, he felt sort of a coldness take over his body. Even Ed Warren looked at him and was like, "You just did something incredibly stupid. Why would you do that?" But he said that other than that and the coldness, everything was pretty normal. For now. I think we're gonna be brave and try to put on eyelashes right now. So we'll see how this goes and if I can even do this while telling this story still. Now, it was soon after this that Arne started having paranormal experiences of his own. It started off light, you know, just an occasional dark figure in the corner of the room. Nothing crazy. But then it started to really escalate. There was even a situation where Debbie said that she really started to feel like Arne was getting possessed. They were talking to another couple and apparently in the middle of the conversation, Arne just started growling. And Debbie said that she knew that that was not Arne doing the growling. Also, how do you explain that to the other couple? A little awkward. Now, as Arne was going through this, they decided to move into a friend's apartment. Now, the apartment was owned by a man named Alan Bono, which was actually somebody that Debbie worked with at the dog kennels, and they were known to really get along and really like Alan Bono. Specifically, Arne and Alan got along very well. People in the neighborhood noted that Arne spoke very, very highly of Alan, and they seemed to get along. They even hung out a few times. But yeah, they got along great. That was until the afternoon of February 16th, when their relationship obviously went extremely south. It was on this day that Arne and Alan went to lunch at a restaurant called the Mug and Munch Cafe with Arne's sister and Debbie. Now, according to Debbie and Alan's sister, they were drinking a lot during this lunch. Like, they had gone through so many glasses of wine each. The sister, I believe, noted that it had to have been between 4 and 7 glasses of wine each. After lunch, they did go back to Alan's apartment where they continued to drink, which, bad idea. Based on police interviews of Wanda and Debbie, it was around 6:30 when Alan made a comment about Debbie. I was trying to find what the comment was exactly, but I could not find anything. Apparently, this comment was so bad that it really set Arne off. This caused an argument which was taken outside of the apartment. According to Debbie, she said, quote, "There was a lot of pushing and shoving and then all hell broke loose." Debbie said that when they were outside, they really started to fight, and that's when Arne pulled out a 5-inch knife, which that is such a weird thing to casually have in your pocket, and stabbed Alan in the stomach 4 times. And then Arne just walked off into the woods. Now, I'm not sure why, but rather than calling an ambulance, Debbie called her father, telling them that something terrible had happened at the apartment and that she needed help, basically. An ambulance did later arrive, and as they were looking at Alan's injuries, they allegedly heard Debbie say, quote, "Oh, Daddy, he didn't mean to do it. You know how he gets when he's been drinking," end quote. Alan was taken to the hospital and later pronounced dead. Now, as all of this was happening, the police were out looking for Arne. They did end up finding him a couple miles away and took him straight to the police station. When he was taken to the police station and being questioned by police about what happened, he said that he had absolutely no recollection of what happened that time. Which, demon or not, after drinking that much alcohol, I probably wouldn't know what happened either, truly. They had been drinking way too much. By the way, I'm underpainting right now, so I know that this looks really, this looks really intense. People are probably listening and watching like, Arne even completely denied having killed his friend because he allegedly had no idea what happened once they got back to their apartment. Now, once word got out that Arne had killed Alan, there was a lot of stuff going on in the media, specifically because Ed and Lorraine Warren went to their lawyer and told him that he was not in his right mind because he was possessed at the time. Ed and Lorraine Warren told Arnes' lawyers that it wasn't Arne that killed Alan. It was the demon that was possessing him. His lawyer said that after looking over the tapes and documents that Ed and Lorraine Warren had, he believed them and he took the case on even though so many people were telling him not to, and that it was basically the worst decision that he could make for himself career-wise. This attorney's name was Martin Manala, and he was a young attorney who was really excited to start his career and just really start to make a name for himself in law. He was so excited about this case that he even took it on pro bono, which is so stupid. There are so many stupid things happening throughout this story, and it's just so frustrating to read about it later on, just knowing like everything that went down, all the mistakes that people were making. But you know, it's his decision. He's a lawyer. He can decide to do that if he wants. Now, Manelen's defense plan was apparently very pricey. He was planning on flying in psychic experts, which is just, I can't imagine being in the courtroom for that. That would be so cool. But he was planning on flying in these psychic experts from all over the country so that they could give their expert testimony against this specific type of case. They even ended up setting a defense fund to be able to pay for it. If any of you guys are in law, is this a normal thing? Because I don't think I've ever heard of a defense fund being set up. So interesting. Now, Manela was quoted in the New York Times as saying, quote, "The courts have dealt with the existence of God. Now they're going to have to deal with the existence of the devil." Ba, ba, ba. Now, during this time, Ed and Lorraine Warren were talking all about this damn case to news media outlets, on talk show TVs. It was insane how many interviews they were doing specifically on this case. They were saying on television that he was innocent and he was possessed by 43 demons. I don't know how they came up with that number. It's extremely specific, but that's what they were telling the American people. They also noted that just a few days after the murder, those demons vanished, just gone. They weren't possessing him anymore, which very convenient. I don't know why that couldn't have happened earlier with David and that weird possession that like they were actually doing a little mini exorcism. That didn't get rid of him, but they're just gone now? I need to know the rules on this stuff because this is just not making any sense to me. As trial was quickly approaching, they realized that Arne was facing up to 25 years to life in prison for the murder of Alan. And during this time, it was gaining a ton of media attention, obviously, because the most popular self-appointed demonologist was talking about it all over the country. Talk shows, late night TV, news interviews, they were everywhere. Now, during trial, the local church was even questioned for their involvement in David's exorcism. They noted that the Glatzel family did reach out to the church for an exorcism. However, the priest that was appointed to them at the time was out of the country. So there was no official or finalized report created for that specific possession. The church also noted that there was never any formal exorcism approved for that case, which is a little odd considering that there was allegedly a mini exorcism performed on David. Now, as both sides were preparing their defense, Ed and Lorraine Warren were busy talking to the press. They were noting their involvement within the Catholic Church, basically saying that they had a great relationship with the church itself. However, the church would not confirm or deny whether or not they had any relationship whatsoever with the Warrens. I don't know why, I just find that so funny. Like, they were basically like, we don't know her. Fast forward to October 28th. The judge refused to allow demonic possession as a form of defense within the court. He stated that, quote, "Evidence of demonic possession is simply not relevant." Now, after Manela presented to the judge that he was planning on bringing in psychics and the church, the judge said that it would be incompetent evidence and that he would not allow it. Which, I love a little courtroom drama. Now, this pissed Manela off, which I'm not sure why, because there's really no way to prove that it was a supernatural thing happening and not necessarily a mental health crisis, which, I mean, I guess they both could be one and the same. I don't know, I do makeup videos, I'm not a lawyer. After going on a short recess break, he went right back into the courtroom and continued with the demonic defense. He literally did not change a thing, even though the judge told him, like, this whole thing you got going on, It's not gonna work. Like, do not bring it up in my courtroom. Later, Manila actually ended up accusing the judge of having biases against the Catholic faith, but that didn't really do much for him. And all of this fighting with the judge definitely was not good with his reputation. That's probably the biggest insult that you can do to a judge, is tell them that they're biased or that they are prejudiced against the case that they're working on. But once all of that started to die down, the drama kind of went away a little bit, and then it was kind of just business as usual within this case. The prosecuting attorneys presented their case, and honestly, the evidence was pretty locked in at this point. They had credible witnesses. They had Arnie's 5-inch knife with Alan's matched blood and DNA. Pretty airtight. Now, since Manila could not go in with the paranormal defense, he decided to go in with a self-defense story, saying that Alan was the aggressor in the situation and Arnie was simply trying to defend himself. He did add a little sprinkle of the paranormal and the church, which he was not supposed to, but he still found a way to squeeze that in there a bit. But the judge warned him that he needed to be extremely careful when talking about any of that stuff, especially because he was questioning some members within the church for their testimony. The judge was basically like, do not try anything. Now, after hearing all the evidence, the jury went, and after about 16 hours of deliberation, they found Arnie guilty for manslaughter. There were members of the jury that did not believe that Arnie meant to kill Alan. It was on December 18th, 1981 that Arnie went back to the court for sentencing. The judge ended up giving him the state's maximum sentence for manslaughter of 20 years. The judge came out later and said that the reason that he gave him the maximum sentence was because it seemed like Arnie was showing little to no remorse over what he did to Alan. He said, quote, "I do not assume the powers of God, but you took a human life and you showed no acknowledgement of guilt and little remorse," end quote. Which caused Debbie Glatzel to yell out, "That's sick," and run out of the courtroom. So still a little drama at the end. Arnie and Debbie still stayed together throughout his sentence, and Arnie was actually released way earlier than expected. He was released in 1986 after serving just 5 years for good behavior. He was described as being an exemplary inmate, and throughout his sentence, his mental condition was being carefully examined, but they stated that his mental state had, quote, no negative factors. When talking about this case, Ed Warren said, quote, "Possession doesn't last 24 hours a day. It comes quickly and leaves quickly. Arnie understands what happened to him. He knows if something happens, how to ward it off, and he won't be stupid enough to take on the devil again." Could you imagine trying to challenge a demon again after all that? That would just be insane. It's interesting because this case from the inside has a lot of opposing opinions. Even Carl and the father who lived in the house at the time of this possession have very different opinions of what was going on. But I'm curious to know, what do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Alright, you guys, thank you so much for watching. Let me know how you liked this video. This is my very first walkthrough, story time, investigation situation. I hope you guys liked it, and let me know if there are any other paranormal cases that you want me to cover next. Don't forget to subscribe, it really helps me out, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye! Whoa, that was perfect timing.